How's it going, everybody? Going to continue on from page 101. According to Alva, she had been as vain as Braxton and as fundamentally dependent upon flattery. She could go without 3 square meals a day, but she couldn't do without her contingent of mealy mouthed admirers, all eager to outdo one another in their matter of compliments. One man could never have satisfied her. Not that she was a nymphomaniac with abnormal physical appetites, but because she wanted attention. And the more men she had around her, the more attention she could receive. She hadn't been able to convince Alva, though, that her battalion of admirers were all of platonic variety. I know niggers too. Well, Alva Alva had summed it up to Emmylou. So I told her she must go, and she went. But Emmylou had queried when she had started to talk about something else. What about your second wife? Oh, he laughed. I married her when I was drunk. She was an old woman about 50. She kept me drunk from Sunday to Sunday. When I finally got sober, she showed me the marriage license, and I well nigh passed out again. But where is she? Emmylou had asked. And how did they let you get married while you were drunk and already had a wife? Alva shrugged his shoulders. I don't know where she is. I ain't seen her since. I left her room that day. I sent Braxton up there to talk to her. Seemed like she'd been drunk too. So it didn't really matter. As for a divorce, I know plenty of spades right here in Ireland. Get married anytime they want to. Who in hell's gonna take the trouble of getting divorced when, if you marry and already have a wife, you can get another without going through all the red tape? Emmylou had to admit that this sounded logical, if illegal. Yet she hadn't been convinced. But, she insisted, don't they look you up and convict you of bigamy? Hell no. The only thing the law bothers niggas about is for stealing, murdering, or chasing white women. And as long as they don't steal from or murder phase, the law ain't got none too particular about bothering them. The only time they act about bigamy is when one of the wives squawk. And they hardly ever do that. They're only glad to see the old man get married again. And then they can do it likewise without spending lots of time on lawyers and courthouse red tape. Excuse me. This and other things which Emmylou had elicited from Alva excuse me, had convinced her that he was undoubtedly the most interesting person she had ever met. What added to this was the strange fact that he seemed somewhat cultured despite his admitted unorganized and haphazard early training. On being questioned, he advanced the theory that perhaps this was due to his long period of service as waiter and valet to socially prominent white people. Many Negroes, he had explained, even the dicty variety, had obtained their savior fare and knowing and knowledge of the social niceties in this manner. Emmylou abed, remembering the many different conversations they had had together, most of which had taken place on the bench in City College Park or in Alva's room. With enough gin for stimulation, Alva could tell many tales of his life and hold her spellbound with vivid descriptions of the various situations he had found herself in. He loved to reminisce when he found a good listener, and Emmylou loved to listen when she found a good talker. Alva often said that he wished someone would write a story of his life. Maybe that was why he cultivated an acquaintance with these writer people. Then seemed as if this one-sided conversational communion strengthened their physical bond. It made Emmylou more palatable to Alva, and it made Alva more a glamorous figure to Emmylou. But here she was daydreaming, and she should be when she should be wondering where she was going to move. She couldn't possibly remain in this place, even if the old lady relented and decided to give her another chance to be respectable. Somehow or other, she felt She had been insulted, and for the first time began to feel angry with the old snuff chewing termagant. Her head ached no longer, but her body was still lethargic. Alva, Alva, Alva. She could think of nothing else. Could she think of nothing else? Supposing she sat upright in bed, supposing she and Alva were to live together, they might get a small apartment and be with one another entirely. Immediately, she was all activity. The headache was forgotten, out of bed into her bathrobe and down the hall to the bathroom. Even the quick shower seemed to be a slow, tedious process, and she was in such a hurry to hasten into the street and telephone Alva in order to tell him of her new plans that she almost forgot to make the very necessary and very customary application of bleaching cream to her face. As it was, she forgot to rinse her face and hands in lim- she as it was she forgot to rinse her face and hands in lemon juice. Alva had lost all patience with Braxton and profanely told him so. No matter what his condition, Braxton would not work. He seemed to believe that because he was handsome and because he was Braxton, he shouldn't have to work. He graced the world with his presence, therefore, it should pay him. A thing of beauty is a joy forever and should be sustained by communal larder. Alva tried to show him that such a larder didn't exist and that one either worked or hustled. But as Alva had explained to Emmylou, Braxton wouldn't work, and as a hustler, he had a distinct failure. He was a distinct failure. He couldn't gamble successfully. He never had a chance to steal, and he always allowed his egotism to defeat his own ends when he tried to get money from women. He assumed that at a word from him, anybody's pocketbook should be at his disposal, and that his handsomeness and personality were a combination none could withstand. It is a platitude among sundry sects and individuals that as a person thinketh, so he is. But it was not within the power of Braxton's mortal body to become the being of that his imagination sought to create. He insisted, for instance, that he was a golden brown replica of Rudolph Valentino. Every picture he could find of the lamented cinema chic, he pasted there on the wall or on some of his belongings. The only reason that likeness of his idol did not decorate all the wall space was because Alva objected to this flapperish ritual. Braxton emulated his silver screen mentor in every way, watched his every gesture on screen, and would stand in front of his mirror at home and practice Rudy's poses and facial expressions. Strange as it may seem, there was a certain likeness between the two, especially at such moments when Braxton would suddenly stand in the center of the floor and give a spontaneous impersonation of Rudy, making love while conquering enemies. Then, at all times, Braxton held his head as Rudy held his, and that and had even learned how to smile and use his eyes in the same captivating manner. But his charms were too obviously cultivated, and his technique too clumsy. He would attract almost anyone to him, but they were sure to bolt away as suddenly as they had come. He could have, but he could not hold. Now, as Alva told Emmylou, this was a distinct handicap to one who wished to be a hustler and live by one's wits off the bounty of others. And the competition was too keen in a place like Harlem, where the adaptability to the city ways sometimes took strange and devious turns for a bungler to have much success. Alva realized this if Braxton didn't and tried to tell him so, but Braxton wouldn't listen. He felt that Alva was merely being envious. The fact that Alva had more suits than he and that Alva had clean shirts, liquor money, and room rent, and that Alva could continue to have these things despite the fact that he had decided to quit work during the hot weather meant nothing to Braxton at all. He had facial and physical perfections, a magnetic body, and much sex appeal. Ergo, he was a master. However, lean days were upon him. His mother and aunt had unexpectedly come to New York to help him celebrate the closing day of his freshman year at Columbia. His surprise at seeing them was nothing in comparison to their surprise at finding that their darling had not even started his freshman year. The aunt was stoic. What could you expect of a child with all that wild Indian blood in him? Now, our people, she hadn't liked Braxton's father. His mother simply could not comprehend his duplicity. Such an unnecessarily cruel and deceptive performance was beyond her understanding. Had she been told that he was guilty of thievery, murder, or rape, she could have borne up and smiled through her tears in maternal fashion. But that he could so completely fool her for 9 months. Incredible. Preposterous. It just couldn't be. She and her sister returned to Boston, telling everyone there what a successful year their darling had had at Columbia, and telling Braxton before they left that he could not have another cent of their money that summer. That if he didn't enter Columbia that fall, well, he was not yet of age. They made many vague threats, none so alarming, however, as the threat of a temporary, if not permanent, suspension of his allowance. By pawning some of his suits, his watch, and diamond ring, he amassed a small stake and took to gambling. Unlucky at love, he should so. Alva, he should, so Alva said, have been lucky at cards and was. But even a lucky man will suffer from lack of skill or foolhardiness. Braxton would gamble only with mature men who gathered in the police protected clubs rather than the young chaps like himself who gathered in private places. He couldn't classify himself with the cheap or the lowly. If he was to gamble, he must gamble in a professional manner with professional men. As in all other affairs, he had had luck, but no skill and little sense. His little gambling stake lasted but for a moment, flitted from him feverishly, and left him holding an empty purse. Then he took to playing the numbers, placing quarters and half dollars on a number compounded of three digits and anxiously perusing the daily clearing house reports to see whether or not he had chosen correctly. Alva two played the numbers consistently and somehow or other managed to remain ahead of the game. Braxton, as was to be expected, hit two or three times, then grew excited over his winnings and began to play two or three or even $5 daily on one number. Such plunging, unattended by scientific observation and close calculation, put him so far behind the game that his winnings were soon dissipated and he had to stop playing altogether. Alva had quit work for the summer. He contended that it was far too hot to stand over a steam pressing machine during the sultry summer months, and there was no other congenial work available. Being a bellhop in one of the New York hotels where colored boys were used calling for too long hours and broken shifts. Then they didn't pay much money, and he hated to work for tips. He certainly would not take an elevator job, paying only $60 or $65 a month at most, and making it necessary for him to work nights one a week from 6 to 8, and days the week, vice versa. Being an elevator operator in a loft building required too much skill, patience, and muscular activity. The same could be said of the shipping clerk positions open in the various wholesale houses. He couldn't, of course, be expected to be a porter and swing a mop. All right, we're going to be cutting this one. Uh, we're going to be ending it. And so we're going to be continuing on to the next one.